A lonely 8-year-old boy hid a sick puppy in his room, but when his mother discovered it, tears streaming down her face, she revealed a truth that changed their lives forever. David pressed his small hands against the cold window glass, watching the neighbor kids playing with their dogs in the street. His breath created fog patches on the window as he leaned closer. A golden retriever chased a tennis ball, its tail wagging. A black lab jumped for a frisbee. Even old Mrs. Peterson's grumpy poodle looked happy today. Maybe if I save my lunch money, David whispered to himself, pulling out the crumpled dollar bills from his pocket. $3.25. He counted it again. The front door creaked open. David? You home, baby? Yes, Mom. He quickly stuffed the money back in his pocket and turned away from the window. Sarah Williams walked in, still wearing her cleaning uniform. Dark circles hung under her eyes. She dropped her heavy bag by the door and tried to smile. How was school today? Fine. David watched her sink into their worn-out couch. A spring squeaked beneath her. Mom? Tommy got a new puppy yesterday. A chocolate lab. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other. And Jessica has 2 cats now because, David, his mom's voice was gentle but firm. We've talked about this. I know, but baby, come here. She patted the space next to her on the couch. David dragged his feet across the carpet and sat down. Sarah wrapped an arm around his shoulders. You know I want to give you everything, right? But pets are expensive. The food, the vet bills. I could share my lunch with it, David said quickly. And I'll walk it every day, even when it rains. I promise I'll stop. Sarah rubbed her temples. I already can't afford your school supplies for next month. The electric bill is past due. And now Mrs. Thompson cut my hours at her house. Her voice cracked. I'm trying, baby. I'm trying so hard. David's throat felt tight. He nodded and stared at his worn-out sneakers. Go to your homework, Sarah said softly. I need to make some calls. David walked to his room, closing the door behind him. Through the thin walls, he heard his mom's voice. Yes, I'm calling about the cleaning position. I see. Yes, I have references. He pulled out his math worksheet, but couldn't focus on the numbers. Outside, kids' laughter mixed with barking. David grabbed his pillow and pressed it against his ears. The next morning, David walked to school alone. Other kids passed him in groups, talking and laughing. A boy on a bike rode by with his dog running alongside him. Hey, poor boy. David's shoulders tensed. He knew that voice. Marcus Johnson and his friends were behind him. Nice shoes, Marcus laughed. Did you get them from the trash? Leave me alone. David walked faster, gripping his backpack straps. What's wrong? Can't afford new ones? Marcus kicked a pebble that hit David's heel. My dad says your mom cleans our toilet. David's face burned. He broke into a run, Marcus's laughter following him down the street. He didn't stop until he reached the school gates, chest heaving. Miss Roberts noticed him slip into class late, face flushed. She frowned but didn't say anything as David slid into his seat in the back row. Partner up for the science project, Miss Roberts announced. David stayed in his chair as other kids quickly paired up. Like always, he'd be the odd one out. David, Miss Roberts called after class. Can you stay for a moment? He approached her desk, scuffing his shoes on the floor. Is everything okay at home? She asked softly. Yes, ma'am. You seem withdrawn lately. More than usual. She leaned forward. If you need someone to talk to. I'm fine. David shifted his backpack. Can I go? I need to walk home. Miss Roberts sighed. All right. But David? My door is always open. The walk home felt longer than usual. David took the back way to avoid Marcus and his friends. The alley behind the convenience store smelled like rotting garbage. Broken glass crunched under his shoes. At home, David found another rejection letter in the mail. He recognized the cleaning company logo. His mom had been excited about that application. The house was quiet and empty. David made himself a peanut butter sandwich, cutting off the moldy edges of the bread. He sat at the kitchen table alone, watching the clock tick toward evening. Sarah came home after dark, smelling of cleaning products. Already ate, baby? She asked, hanging up her coat. Yeah. David watched her heat up leftover rice in the microwave. I have good news, she said, forcing cheerfulness into her tired voice. Mrs. Anderson wants me to clean her house twice a week now, instead of once. That's a little extra money. That's good, David said, but he saw how his mom's hands shook as she spooned rice onto a chipped plate. That night, David lay in bed listening to the neighbor's dog barking. His room felt too big, too quiet. On his bedside table, a torn-out magazine picture showed a boy hugging a puppy. David had found it in the school library and snuck it home in his pocket. A strange sound made him sit up. It came again, a weak whimper from somewhere outside his window. David pushed back his covers and crept to the glass, pressing his ear against it. Another whimper, clearer this time. It sounded scared. Hurt. David's heart beat faster as he looked toward his closed bedroom door. His mom was asleep. He could hear her soft snoring from down the hall. The whimper came again. David made his decision. He grabbed his flashlight from under the bed and moved toward his window. Whatever was out there needed help, and for the first time in a long time, maybe someone needed him. David's hands shook as he pushed up his bedroom window. The night air hit his face, carrying the whimper closer now. He aimed his flashlight beam into the darkness. "Hello," he whispered. The sound had come from behind the trash cans. His feet hit the cold ground silently. David crept forward, sweeping the flashlight left and right. Another whimper. He moved closer to the trash cans, heart pounding. The beam caught something moving. A small shape huddled against the brick wall, trembling. "Oh," David breathed. A puppy stared back at him, ears flat against its head. Its fur was matted and dirty, a mixture of brown and white barely visible under the grime. It couldn't have been more than a few months old. David crouched down slowly. "Hey there," he whispered. "It's okay." The puppy pressed itself harder against the wall, tail tucked. "I won't hurt you." David set the flashlight down, letting it illuminate them both. He held out his hand, palm up, like he'd seen other kids do with their dogs. The puppy's nose twitched. It took a tiny step forward, then froze. "That's it," David encouraged. "Good boy. Or girl. I don't know yet." Another step. David stayed perfectly still. The puppy was close enough now that he could see its ribs through its dirty coat. It looked up at him with big brown eyes. "You're hungry, aren't you?" David thought of the peanut butter sandwich he hadn't finished. "Wait here." He ran back to his window, heart racing. The house was still quiet. His mom's snoring hadn't changed rhythm. David grabbed the sandwich from his desk and hurried back outside. The puppy was still there, watching him. David broke off a small piece of the sandwich and held it out. The puppy's nose worked overtime, sniffing the air. "Come on," David whispered. "It's good, I promise." The puppy inched forward. Its cold nose touched David's fingers as it gently took the bread. David's heart felt like it might burst. "See? We're friends now." The puppy swallowed the bread in one gulp and looked up expectantly. David broke off another piece. "My mom," he said as the puppy ate. "She can't know about you yet. Not until I figure something out." The puppy finished the sandwich and licked David's fingers. Its tail gave a tentative wag. "You need a place to sleep?" David looked around. His old sweater was still in the donation box his mom hadn't taken to Goodwill yet. "Hold on." He fetched the sweater and laid it behind the trash cans, creating a small nest. The puppy sniffed it cautiously. "It's yours," David said. "But you have to be quiet, okay?" As if understanding, the puppy curled up in the sweater. David sat next to it, gently touching its head. The fur was soft under the dirt. Thunder rumbled in the distance. The puppy trembled. "Don't be scared," David whispered. He couldn't leave it out here in the storm. "Come on." Before he could change his mind, David scooped up the puppy and sweater together. He climbed back through his window just as the first raindrops fell. The puppy explored his room, sniffing everything while David watched the door nervously. Finally, it settled in the sweater nest he made in his closet. "Good boy," David whispered, then yawned. School was in 6 hours. "Stay quiet." He fell asleep to the sound of rain and soft puppy breaths. Morning came too soon. David's mom knocked on his door. "Time for school, baby." David jerked awake. The puppy was still asleep in his closet. "I'm up," he called, heart racing. "Breakfast in 10 minutes." David dressed quickly, then knelt by the puppy. "I have to go to school," he whispered. "Stay here and be quiet. Please." The puppy licked his hand. David pulled out his lunch money and looked at it. The puppy needed food more than he did. I'll bring you something after school, he promised. He cracked his window open for fresh air and closed the closet door carefully. At breakfast, David could barely sit still. You okay? His mom asked, buttering toast. You're jumpy this morning? Just excited about a science project? Sarah raised an eyebrow, but didn't press. School dragged by. David couldn't focus on anything. Miss Roberts called on him twice, but he didn't hear the questions. During lunch, he snuck to the cafeteria dumpster and found half a hamburger someone had thrown away. He wrapped it in napkins and stuffed it in his backpack. The walk home felt endless. What if his mom had found the puppy? What if it had made noise? What if a bark from ahead stopped him cold? But it wasn't from his house. Tommy was playing with his new lab in his front yard. Hey, David. Tommy called. Want to meet Max? David shook his head and hurried past. Any other day, he would have given anything for that invitation. The house was quiet when he got home. David ran to his room and opened the closet door. The puppy launched itself at him, tail wagging furiously. It covered his face in kisses. Chill. David laughed, trying to quiet the excited animal. We have to be careful. He pulled out the hamburger. The puppy devoured it in seconds. You need a name, David said, scratching behind its ears. The puppy rolled over for a belly rub. And you're definitely a boy. The afternoon passed in a blur of quiet play and constant vigilance. David jumped at every sound from outside. When his mom's car pulled up, he rushed the puppy back into the closet. Stay quiet, he begged. Please. David. His mom called. Can you help with the groceries? Coming. That night, David snuck half his dinner into a napkin. The puppy needed a real bath, but the best he could do was wipe him down with a damp towel. The white patches in his fur showed through cleaner now. I think I'll call you Lucky, David whispered as the puppy curled up in his lap. Because we found each other. Lucky's tail thumped against the floor. A car door slammed outside. David peeked out his window. Mrs. Thompson, his mom's old employer, was getting out of her car next door. She looked up at David's window. David ducked down quickly, heart pounding. Had she seen Lucky through the window? Time for bed. He heard his mom call. Okay. David settled Lucky in the closet with fresh water in a paper cup. Good night, boy. As he lay in bed, David realized his life had completely changed in less than 24 hours. He had a secret now, a big one, and somehow he had to find a way to keep it. 3 days. David had managed to keep Lucky's secret for 3 days. His backpack now carried more crumbs than books, and his lunch money was long gone. But Lucky's tail wagged every time David walked through the door, and that made everything worth it. I brought you something special today, David whispered, closing his bedroom door. Lucky danced around his feet as he pulled out a half-eaten chicken sandwich. Tommy didn't want it. Lucky wolfed down the food while David watched the door nervously. His mom would be home in 2 hours. David. Miss Roberts's voice echoed in his memory from earlier that day. This is the 3rd homework assignment you've missed this week. Is everything all right? He nodded, avoiding her eyes. The truth was, he'd fallen asleep during homework last night, exhausted from playing with Lucky and constantly watching for his mom. A sudden bark made David jump. Chill. He rushed to Lucky, heart pounding. You can't do that, remember? Lucky licked his face, tail still wagging. David heard Mrs. Peterson next door talking to someone. Had she heard? We have to be more careful, David whispered, scratching behind Lucky's ears. The puppy felt warm. Too warm. Lucky coughed, a wet, raspy sound that made David's stomach twist. The puppy had been doing that more often today. You okay, boy? David touched Lucky's nose. It was hot and dry. Maybe you need more water. He was filling the paper cup when his mom's voice called from the living room. David? You home? The cup slipped from his hands, spilling across the bathroom floor. She was early. Why was she early? Why, he called back, frantically mopping up the water with toilet paper. Just using the bathroom. Come here when you're done. We need to talk. David's heart hammered against his ribs. Had she found out? No, Lucky was still in his room. Still their secret. He found his mom sitting on the couch, still in her cleaning uniform. An envelope sat on the coffee table. Your teacher called, Sarah said quietly. David's mouth went dry. She's worried about you. Sarah patted the couch beside her. Says you're falling asleep in class. Missing assignments? I'm fine, David said quickly. A bark cut through the air. Clear. Unmistakable. Sarah's head snapped up. What was that? TV. David blurted. Next door. Tommy's dog. Another bark. From his room. Sarah stood up. David grabbed her arm. Mom, wait, David. Her voice was stern. What's going on? Lucky barked again, followed by a cough that seemed to shake the walls. David's eyes filled with tears. He was all alone, he whispered. In the rain. He was scared and hungry, and Sarah was already moving toward his room. David ran after her. Mom, please. He needs me. I can take care of him. I promise. I've been giving him my lunch money, and Sarah stopped so suddenly that David ran into her back. She turned slowly. You've been what? David stared at his feet. He needed food. Sarah closed her eyes, tears sliding down her cheeks. So that's why you've been so tired. You haven't been eating lunch. She opened David's door. Lucky sat in the middle of the room, tail wagging uncertainly. The sweater nest was visible in the open closet, surrounded by crumbs and paper cups. Oh, baby, Sarah whispered. She knelt down, reaching for Lucky. The puppy backed away, coughing. How long? 3 days, David said softly. Please don't make him leave. Please, Mom. I'll do anything. Sarah touched Lucky's head gently. He's burning up. I try to take care of him. David's voice cracked. I did everything I could, but he started coughing and he needs a vet. Sarah stood up, wiping her eyes. Which we can't afford. Mom, David, listen to me. She gripped his shoulders. I know you were trying to help, but this puppy is sick. He needs medicine, proper food, vaccines. We can barely keep ourselves fed. I'll get a job, David said desperately. I can mow lawns or you're 8 years old. Sarah's voice rose. You shouldn't be worrying about money. You shouldn't be skipping meals. You shouldn't. She broke off, shoulders shaking. Lucky whimpered and pressed against David's legs. Another cough racked his small body. What's going to happen to him? David whispered. Sarah wiped her eyes again. There's a shelter on Oak Street. They can't know. David wrapped his arms around Lucky. They'll put him in a cage. He'll be alone again. He'll get medical care, Sarah said gently. Food. A chance at a real home. This is his real home. David's tears fell into Lucky's fur. He chose me, Mom. He trusts me. A knock at the front door made them both jump. Lucky barked weakly. Mrs. Thompson. Sarah breathed, looking out David's window. She must have heard. Don't answer it, David begged. Another knock. Sarah, are you home? We need to talk about the dog. Sarah straightened her uniform. Stay here, she told David. Both of you. David held Lucky tighter, listening to his mom's footsteps. The front door opened. Mrs. Thompson, I can explain. A dog, Sarah? Really? Mrs. Thompson's sharp voice carried clearly. After I specifically told you my allergies were why I had to let you go. It's not what you think. I've heard barking for days. You lied to me. Please, Sarah's voice cracked. My son, I should report you to the landlord. Mrs. Thompson sniffed. No pets allowed. It's in your lease. David pressed his face into Lucky's fur, trying to muffle his sobs. This was all his fault. He'd ruined everything. The front door closed. Silence stretched through the house. When Sarah returned, her face was wet but determined. Pack his things, she said quietly. The shelter closes at 6. Mom, please, David. She knelt in front of him. Sometimes love means doing what's best for someone, even when it breaks your heart. Lucky coughed again, harder this time. David looked at the puppy's tired eyes, the way his sides heaved with each breath. His voice trembled. Can we visit him? Sarah pulled him close, puppy and all. Oh, baby. Of course we can. They sat there on the floor, holding each other while Lucky's fever burned against them. Outside, the sun began to set. Time was running out, and David had never felt more alone. Sarah's old Toyota coughed to life in the gathering darkness. David sat in the back seat, cradling Lucky in a clean towel. The puppy's breathing came in short, raspy bursts. The shelter's good, Sarah said, glancing in the rearview mirror. Her eyes were red. They'll take care of him until someone else takes him home, David finished. His throat felt tight. Someone with money. Sarah's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Baby, I need you to understand something. She stopped at a red light, turning to face him. Being poor doesn't make us bad people. It doesn't mean we love less. Then why can't we keep him? Because love isn't enough sometimes. The light turned green. Lucky needs medicine, tests, regular food, things we just can't give him right now. Lucky coughed, his whole body shaking. David held him closer. What if? David's voice cracked. What if nobody wants him because he's sick? Sarah didn't answer. Outside, streetlights flickered on one by one. A man in a business suit stood on the corner, watching them drive past. David recognized him. He'd seen him before, observing from a distance. Mom? David asked suddenly. Do you know that man? Sarah glanced out the window. What man? The one in the suit. He's been watching our house. Sarah's shoulders tensed. When did you first see him? A few days ago. After I found Lucky. The Toyota slowed down. Sarah looked in the rearview mirror, then pulled over. Stay in the car, she said, unbuckling her seatbelt. Mom? Lock the doors. She got out, straightening her uniform. The man was walking toward them. David watched through the window, heart pounding. Lucky whimpered. It's okay, David whispered, not sure who he was trying to comfort, Lucky or himself. The man stopped a few feet from Sarah. Even in the dim light, David could see his expensive shoes, the gold watch on his wrist. He said something David couldn't hear. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. The man spoke again, gesturing toward the car. Sarah shook her head, wiping her eyes. Please, David heard her say. We were just taking him to the shelter. The man reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. Sarah stared at it like it might bite her. Lucky coughed again, harder this time. The man looked toward the car, his face kind but unreadable. Sarah walked back slowly, clutching the business card. She got in and sat there, not starting the car. Mom? David leaned forward. What did he say? Sarah took a shaky breath. He wants to help. Help how? He says he's a veterinarian. Dr. Charles? She turned the card over in her hands. He's been watching because he noticed Lucky was sick. He has a clinic nearby. Hope bloomed in David's chest. He can make Lucky better? It's not that simple, baby. Sarah's voice wavered. We still can't afford. A tap on the window made them both jump. Dr. Charles stood there, holding up his medical ID badge. Sarah rolled down her window halfway. Mrs. Williams, Dr. Charles said softly, I understand your hesitation, but that puppy needs immediate medical attention. Lucky's cough punctuated his words. I can't pay you, Sarah whispered. I'm not asking for payment. Dr. Charles glanced at David. Sometimes helping is its own reward. Why? Sarah's voice hardened. Why would you help us? Dr. Charles was quiet for a moment. Because 30 years ago, I was that boy. He nodded toward David. And someone helped me. Sarah's hands trembled on the steering wheel. My clinic is 5 minutes away, Dr. Charles continued. Follow me in your car. No obligations. Just let me examine the puppy. Lucky wheezed, his small body burning with fever. David met his mom's eyes in the mirror. Please, he whispered. Sarah looked at the business card again. At Dr. Charles. At her son holding the sick puppy. Okay, she said finally. We'll follow you. Dr. Charles's clinic was small but clean. The sign read Charles Family Veterinary in simple letters. He unlocked the door and led them inside. Examination room 2, he said, flipping on lights. The room smelled of antiseptic. A metal table gleamed under bright fluorescent bulbs. May I? Dr. Charles held out his hands for Lucky. David hesitated. Sarah squeezed his shoulder. It's okay, baby. David carefully handed Lucky over. The puppy whimpered but didn't struggle. Dr. Charles's examination was gentle but thorough. He listened to Lucky's chest, took his temperature, checked his eyes and ears. Pneumonia, he said finally. Fairly advanced. He'll need antibiotics, fluids, and close monitoring. For how long? Sarah asked. At least a few days. Dr. Charles stroked Lucky's head. He's also malnourished and needs vaccines. David's heart sank. We can't afford. I have a proposal, Dr. Charles interrupted. He looked at Sarah. Mrs. Williams, do you know why I've been watching your house? Sarah shook her head. I'm looking for a new office manager. Someone honest, hardworking, and compassionate. He smiled. Someone who would give up their own lunch money to feed a stray puppy. Sarah's eyes widened. What? The position includes full benefits. Medical, dental. He scratched Lucky's ears. And veterinary care for one very lucky puppy. The room went silent except for Lucky's breathing. This isn't charity, Dr. Charles added quickly. I need help running this place. My last manager retired after 15 years. Sarah's voice shook. I don't have experience in. You have experience in hard work. In caring. In doing whatever it takes. Dr. Charles's voice was firm. I can teach the rest. Lucky's tail gave a weak wag. David held his breath. Think about it, Dr. Charles said. He reached for a drawer and pulled out a syringe. For now, let's get this little one started on antibiotics. Sarah watched him prepare the injection. If I took the job, we could keep him. That would be between you and your landlord. Dr. Charles smiled. But I happen to know Mrs. Thompson's brother. He owns your building. David's heart leaped. Mom? Sarah looked at her son. At Lucky. At the kind veterinarian who'd been watching and waiting for the right moment to help. When do I start? She whispered. Lucky's condition worsened overnight. The antibiotics hadn't kicked in yet, and his breathing became more labored with each passing hour. David refused to leave the clinic, curling up in a chair beside the observation kennel where Lucky lay connected to and for. Baby, you need sleep, Sarah said, draping her jacket over him. It's almost midnight. I'm not leaving him. David pressed his hand against the kennel door. Lucky's tail thumped weakly against the blanket. Dr. Charles appeared with 2 cups of hot chocolate. Here, he said, handing them out. It's going to be a long night. Sarah accepted the cup hesitantly. Dr. Charles, we can't keep imposing. John, he interrupted. Please call me John. And you're not imposing. I'm the one who invited you to stay. Lucky's coughing echoed through the quiet clinic. Each bark sounded worse than the last. Why isn't he getting better? David's voice cracked. John knelt beside him. Medicine takes time, son. His body is fighting hard. But what if? David couldn't finish the sentence. Hey. John's voice was gentle. Look at me. David turned, tears blurring his vision. Lucky is young and strong. Yes, he's very sick, but he has something powerful on his side. John smiled. He has people who love him. Sarah touched David's shoulder. Dr. John is right. Lucky's a fighter. A violent coughing fit seized Lucky. The puppy's whole body convulsed. Mom! David cried out. John was already moving, unlocking the kennel door. He lifted Lucky carefully, checking his breathing. His lungs are getting congested, John muttered. We need to clear them. He carried Lucky to an examination room, Sarah and David right behind him. The puppy's breathing came in sharp, painful gasps. Sarah, hold him upright, John instructed, grabbing equipment from cabinets. David talked to him. Keep him calm. David stroked Lucky's head while his mom supported the puppy's body. You're okay, boy. You're going to be okay. Please be okay. John returned with a nebulizer mask. This will help him breathe, but he needs to stay still. Lucky struggled weakly as John fitted the mask over his muzzle. Shoo, David whispered. It's helping you. Let it help you. Minutes crawled by. Lucky's breathing gradually eased, becoming less ragged. Good boy, John praised, adjusting the mask. That's it. Sarah's uniform was wrinkled, her hair falling from its neat bun. She'd been supposed to start training for her new job today. Instead, she'd spend hours watching her son's heart break piece by piece. I should call Mrs. Anderson, she said quietly. Tell her I can't clean her house tomorrow. Already taken care of, John said, checking Lucky's temperature. I called all your clients this morning. Explained the situation. Sarah stared at him. You did what? They understood. Most of them even asked to be updated about Lucky. But Sarah shook her head. Why would you do that? John's hands stilled on Lucky's fur. Because no one helped my mother when she needed it. When I was David's age, we lost everything. Our home, our dignity. No one stepped in. David looked up from Lucky. What happened? Someone finally did help. A veterinarian like me. John smiled sadly. He gave my mother a job. Gave us a chance. I promised myself I'd do the same if I ever could. Lucky's tail wagged slowly, his breathing steadier now. The fever's coming down, John announced. The antibiotics are starting to work. David's shoulders sagged with relief. He's going to be okay. He's not out of the woods yet. But the clinic's front door chimed. John frowned. We're closed. Heavy footsteps approached. A man's voice called out, Hello? Anyone here? Sarah tensed. That sounds like... Mrs. Thompson's brother appeared in the doorway. The landlord. Ah! He looked around the room, taking in Sarah's uniform, David's tear-stained face, the sick puppy. So it's true. Robert. John straightened up. I was going to call you in the morning. Marta called me tonight. Very upset. The landlord crossed his arms. Something about a dog in a no-pets building. Sarah stepped forward. Mr. Thompson, I can explain. No need. His eyes fixed on Lucky. Lease violation is grounds for immediate eviction. Now wait a minute, John started. The rules are clear. Mr. Thompson pulled out a paper from his jacket. I have a notice right here. David burst into tears. Please don't make us leave. Lucky's sick. He needs help. Robert. John's voice was steel. A word outside? The landlord hesitated, then nodded curtly. They stepped into the hallway, leaving Sarah holding David while Lucky whimpered in the nebulizer mask. Through the wall, they heard raised voices. Don't care about your bleeding heart. Remember who helped when Jennifer was sick? That was different. Was it? Silence fell. David pressed his face into his mom's side, sure their world was falling apart again. The door opened. Mr. Thompson walked in, his face unreadable. Mrs. Williams, he cleared his throat. It seems I may have been hasty. Sarah's arms tightened around David. Dr. Charles has agreed to personally guarantee any damage the dog might cause. Mr. Thompson straightened his tie. And to cover a pet deposit? I don't understand, Sarah whispered. You can keep the dog. Mr. Thompson wouldn't meet their eyes, provided it gets proper veterinary care and stays quiet. David's heart soared. Really? Yes, really? Mr. Thompson turned to leave, then paused. And Mrs. Williams? The night maintenance position at my office building just opened up. If you're interested. Sarah's mouth fell open. Yes. Yes, I am. Good. Come by tomorrow to fill out paperwork. He nodded to John. We're even now. After he left, Sarah turned to John. What did you say to him? Just reminded him that everyone needs help sometimes. John checked Lucky's breathing again. Even landlords. Lucky's tail thumped against the examination table. His eyes were clearer now, more alert. The nebulizer treatment helped, John said. But he'll need another dose in 4 hours. We'll stay, David said immediately. Sarah smoothed his hair. Baby, you have school? Actually, John interrupted, I could use an assistant tomorrow. Someone to help monitor Lucky's breathing, keep him company. He winked at David. Know anyone qualified? David's face lit up. Me. I can help. Thought so. John smiled at Sarah. If it's okay with your mom? Sarah looked at her son, at the puppy fighting for breath, at the doctor who'd changed their lives in one night. Yes, she said softly. It's okay. Dawn broke over the clinic's windows, painting the examination room in soft orange light. David had finally fallen asleep in the chair, his hand still reaching through the kennel bars to touch Lucky's fur. Sarah sat nearby, watching them both breathe and sink. Coffee. John appeared with 2 steaming cups. Thank you. Sarah accepted one gratefully. For everything. John settled into the other chair. Lucky's fever broke an hour ago. I heard him coughing less. The antibiotics are working. John sipped his coffee. Though I suspect his recovery has more to do with that boy right there. Sarah watched David stir slightly. He's always been special. So gentle, so caring. She wiped her eyes. I've been failing him. No, John said firmly. You've been surviving. There's a difference. Is there? Sarah's voice cracked. He's been going hungry to feed a puppy, and I didn't even notice. Because he hid it from you. Because he knew you were already carrying too much. Lucky whimpered in his sleep. David immediately sat up, blinking. Is he okay? Just dreaming, John assured him. His breathing's much better. David rubbed his eyes. Can I take him out of the kennel? John nodded. Gentle now. Keep the 4-line clear. David carefully opened the kennel door. Lucky's tail wagged as the boy lifted him, mindful of the tubes. "Good morning, boy," David whispered. Lucky licked his chin. Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from Mr. Thompson about the night job paperwork. "I should go," she said uncertainly. "Go," John encouraged. "David and Lucky will be fine here. I'll teach him how to be a proper veterinary assistant." David's eyes lit up. "Really? Really?" John pulled a small white coat from a cabinet. Every assistant needs a uniform. The coat was too big, the sleeves rolled up multiple times, but David beamed with pride. Sarah stood, gathering her purse. "You'll call if anything." "Of course." John smiled. "Go take care of the paperwork. Start building your new life." She kissed David's forehead, touched Lucky's head gently, then hurried out. "All right, Assistant David," John said once she'd gone. "First lesson, checking vital signs." The morning passed in a blur of learning. John taught David how to measure Lucky's temperature, count his breaths per minute, check his gum color for signs of infection. "Pink is good," David recited seriously. "White or blue means not enough oxygen." "Excellent." John made notes in Lucky's chart. "Now, what's the normal breathing rate for a puppy his size?" 15 to 30 breaths per minute. David counted Lucky's breaths silently. "He's at 28 now. Better than last night. You're a natural." John smiled. "Want to help me with my morning rounds?" David's eyes widened. "There are other animals here?" 3 cats recovering from surgery, a rabbit with an ear infection, and a very grumpy parrot. "Can Lucky come?" "He needs rest." John checked the forebag. "But we'll leave the door open so he can see us." They visited each patient, John explaining their conditions while David absorbed everything. The parrot Wolf whistled at his white coat. "Dr. John?" David asked as they checked the rabbit's ears. "How did you know?" "About us needing help?" John's hands stilled. "I saw you finding Lucky that night. Watched you share your food. Make him a bed. It reminded me so much of myself at your age." "What happened to you?" "When you were little? My father left like yours. My mother cleaned houses like yours." John resumed, checking the rabbit. "One winter, I found a cat in the snow. Brought her home, even though we couldn't afford to feed her." "What happened to her?" "A veterinarian saw us. Dr. Miller. He helped the cat and gave my mother a job, just like I'm doing now." John smiled sadly. "He passed away last year. Is that why you became a vet?" "Part of it." John set the rabbit back in its cage. "I wanted to help animals, yes. But more than that, I wanted to help people like Dr. Miller helped us." A weak bark interrupted them. Lucky was trying to stand in his kennel. "Hey, take it easy," David hurried back. "You're still sick." "He's getting stronger," John observed. "Fighting spirit, just like his boy." David helped Lucky settle back down. "When can he come home?" "Let's see how he does today. If his breathing stays stable." The clinic door chimed. Sarah rushed in, face flushed with excitement. "Mom?" David called. "What happened?" "I got it." She waved some papers. "The night job, and Mr. Thompson is letting us stay in the apartment with Lucky." And she stopped, catching her breath. "And he's paying for training courses so I can get certified in office management." "That's wonderful." John beamed. "There's more." Sarah knelt in front of David. Mrs. Thompson called. She apologized, said she was wrong about everything. She's even offering to let me clean her house again, with better pay. "But you don't need to clean houses anymore," David said, confused. "No, baby, I don't." Sarah hugged him tight. "For the first time in so long, I don't have to work myself to exhaustion just to survive." Lucky barked again, stronger this time. "Someone wants to celebrate too," John laughed. He checked the puppy's vitals one more time. Temperature's normal. Breathing's good. If he stays stable for a few more hours, he can come home? David asked hopefully. "He can come home?" Sarah wiped her eyes. "I don't know how to thank you. For everything, thank me by succeeding." John touched Lucky's head gently. "By breaking the cycle. By remembering someday to help someone else who needs it." David looked up at him. "Like Dr. Miller helped you?" "Exactly like that." Lucky's tail thumped against the kennel floor. His eyes were bright now, the fever gone. Sarah squeezed David's shoulder. "How about we go shopping for dog supplies while Lucky finishes his 4? He'll need a proper bed, food bowls, and a collar?" David asked hopefully. "And a collar." Sarah smiled. "A red one, I think, to match his personality. I'd say he's earned it." John agreed. Just like you've earned your assistant's coat. David straightened proudly in his oversized white coat. Can I come back sometimes? To help? Every Saturday if you want. John winked. Lucky will need checkups anyway. Sarah watched her son beam with joy, saw the sick puppy growing stronger by the hour, looked at the kind doctor who'd changed their lives with one act of compassion. Sometimes she realized miracles didn't look like winning the lottery or finding a fortune. Sometimes they looked like a boy in an oversized white coat, learning to heal, like a puppy fighting his way back to health, like a mother finally able to give her son the life he deserved. Sometimes miracles looked exactly like this. The first morning Lucky came home, David woke up to a wet nose pressed against his cheek. No more sneaking food, no more constant fear of discovery. Lucky slept in a real dog bed now, though he preferred David's. Good morning to you too, David laughed, scratching behind Lucky's ears. The puppy's coat was shiny now, the matted fur just a memory. Sarah's voice called from the kitchen. Breakfast ready. Lucky's food is here too. David padded out in his pajamas, Lucky trotting behind him. The kitchen smelled like pancakes, real ones, not just toast. Mom? David stopped in the doorway. You're not at work? Night shift, remember? Sarah flipped another pancake. She looked different, rested, smiling. I could do breakfast now. Lucky's new red collar jingled as he ran to his food bowl. Real puppy food filled it, not scraps and leftovers. Eat up, Sarah said, sliding pancakes onto David's plate. Dr. Charles is expecting his assistant today. David grinned, syrup dripping from his fork. Can Lucky come? As long as you both behave. Sarah ruffled his hair. No chasing the grumpy parrot this time. The walk to the clinic felt different now. David didn't have to hide or take back alleys. Lucky pranced beside him on a new leash, stopping to sniff everything. Good morning, Assistant David. John called as they entered. He was already in his white coat. And good morning, Lucky. Ready for your checkup? Lucky wagged his tail, following them to the examination room. No more 4 tubes, no more nebulizer mask. Just routine vaccines now. Breathing sounds perfect, John said, listening to Lucky's chest. You'd never know he was so sick. David held Lucky still for his shot, just like John had taught him. Good boy, he praised. So brave. A commotion at the front desk interrupted them. David heard arguing voices. Stay here, John said, heading to investigate. David stroked Lucky's fur, listening. A woman was crying. Please, he's all my son has, but I can't afford. Give me a minute, John's voice replied. He returned to the examination room. David? Want to help with something important? David nodded eagerly. There's a boy out there about your age. His cat is sick, and his mom, well, they need help. Like you did? David understood immediately. Lucky can show them around. He knows all about getting better here. John smiled. Perfect. Ready to be a good example. They found a thin woman at the front desk, clutching a carrier. A boy David's age stood beside her, tears on his face. Hi, David said softly. I'm David. This is Lucky. The boy looked up. I'm Tommy. He wiped his eyes. Not the Tommy from school. Different Tommy. Want to see where your cat will stay? Lucky was really sick too, but Dr. Charles fixed him. Tommy nodded hesitantly. David led him to the recovery area, Lucky trotting alongside. See? The kennels are nice, and you can visit anytime. Really? Tommy touched the kennel bars. Mom said we couldn't afford. Dr. Charles helps people who need it, David explained. He helped us when we had nothing. In the background, he heard John talking softly to Tommy's mom. Payment plan assistant program. Work something out. Tommy's cat meowed from the carrier. Lucky sat perfectly still, showing he wouldn't chase it. Your dog is really nice, Tommy said. He wasn't always mine. I found him in an alley. David watched understanding dawn on Tommy's face. Sometimes the best things happen when you think everything's hopeless. By lunchtime, Tommy's cat was settled in within 4, just like Lucky had been. Tommy sat beside the kennel, talking softly. You did well, John told David as they cleaned instruments. You knew exactly what he needed to hear, because someone did the same for me. David straightened his white coat. When do I start teaching him to be an assistant too? John laughed. Let's get his cat better first. The afternoon brought more patients, a limping dog, a sneezing guinea pig, another cat for vaccines. David helped with each one, remembering everything John taught him. You're getting good at this, John observed. I want to be just like you when I grow up, David said seriously. Helping animals and people too. You already are. John handed him a stethoscope. Want to listen to Lucky's heart? David pressed the stethoscope to Lucky's chest. The strong heartbeat filled his ears. Wow, he breathed. That's the sound of love, John said softly. A heart beating stronger because someone cared enough to save it. Sarah arrived as they were closing up. She looked happy in her new office clothes. How was work? John asked. Good. I'm learning the filing system, and Mr. Thompson says I'm picking it up fast. She smiled. How was my little veterinarian today? Asked Tommy's mom. John winked. David here might have a future in pet therapy. On the walk home, Lucky stopped to play with a newspaper blowing in the wind. David watched him pounce and jump, healthy and strong. Mom, he asked suddenly, are you happy? Sarah looked surprised. Of course I am, baby. Are you? David thought about his white coat hanging in the clinic, about Tommy's relieved face, about Lucky's heart beating strong under the stethoscope. Yeah, he said. Really happy. At home, Sarah started dinner, real groceries now, not just whatever was on sale. Lucky curled up in his bed, watching them with contented eyes. Dr. Charles asked if you want to help with surgery tomorrow, Sarah said. Just watching, of course. If you feel ready. David's heart leaped. Really? Really? He says you have steady hands? She stirred the pot. And a steady heart. Later in bed, David listened to the night sounds. No more fear of discovery. No more empty stomach. No more watching his mom work herself sick. Lucky jumped up beside him, circling 3 times before settling down. We did it, boy, David whispered, scratching his ears. We're home? The puppy sighed contentedly. Outside, cars passed, people walked, life went on. But in this room, on this night, everything was perfect. David closed his eyes, smiling. Tomorrow would bring more patients to help, more things to learn, more chances to make someone else's world better, just like someone had done for them. 1 month had passed since Lucky's recovery. The clinic's morning light found David already in his white coat, carefully organizing supplies while Lucky supervised from his special corner. Gauze, cotton swabs, antiseptic. David counted items, just like John had taught him. The supply closet was his responsibility now on Saturdays. Morning, Assistant David. John's voice called from the front. Ready for a big day. Coming. David gave Lucky a quick pat. Stay, boy. The waiting room was fuller than usual. Weekend mornings always were. David recognized some of the faces. Regular patients. Neighbors who'd heard about Dr. Charles's kindness. First up, John checked his chart. Tommy's cat for a follow-up. Tommy waved from his chair. His cat, now healthy and strong, purred in its carrier. Want to help with the examination? John asked David. Can I check his breathing first? David had been practicing his stethoscope technique. Go right ahead. Tommy watched admiringly as David listened to his cat's chest. You're really good at this. Thanks. David smiled. Lucky taught me a lot about being gentle. As if hearing his name, Lucky trotted out to greet the visitors. His presence always calmed nervous pets and their owners. Blood pressure next? David asked John. Perfect. Then you can tell Tommy the good news. David's eyes lit up. His cat can go home today? Completely recovered. John ruffled David's hair. Thanks to his excellent care team, the morning flew by in a whirl of examinations, treatments, and happy reunions. David helped with each patient, his confidence growing with every success. Around noon, Sarah arrived with lunch for everyone. She did this every Saturday now, part of their new routine. Mrs. Williams, Tommy's mom, stood up. I wanted to thank you. The office job you told me about. I got it. Sarah beamed. That's wonderful. When do you start? Monday. I can't believe. She wiped her eyes. A month ago, we could barely afford food. Now you're breaking the cycle, Sarah finished softly. Just like we did. David watched them talk, remembering his own mother's tears not so long ago. Lucky leaned against his leg, tail wagging gently. Ready for the afternoon surgery observation? John asked, finishing his sandwich. David sat up straighter. What are we doing today? Spaying operation. More complicated than the ones you've watched before. John eyed him carefully. Think you can handle it? Yes, sir. David had been studying the anatomy charts John gave him. Scrub and then assistant. The operating room was David's favorite place now. Not because of the procedures, though those were fascinating, but because of the quiet focus, the way everyone worked together to help. Scalpel, John said calmly. David handed it over, just like they practiced. His hands didn't shake anymore. Good. John made the first incision. Now watch carefully. This is how we... Hours later, David sat in the recovery area, monitoring the patient's breathing. Lucky lay beside him, ever the faithful companion. You're getting really good at this, Sarah said from the doorway. She changed in her night work clothes. Think I could be a real vet someday? Baby, you already are. She kissed his forehead. Just a smaller version. The patient stirred, and David immediately checked her vitals. Normal. Perfect. David, John called. Can you help with discharge instructions? New puppy going home. In the waiting room, a little girl clutched a squirming puppy. Her eyes were wide with worry. This is Assistant David, John introduced. He's our puppy expert. David knelt down to the girl's level. What's your puppy's name? Princess, she whispered. That's a great name. David smiled. Want to know how to help Princess be as happy as my dog Lucky? The girl nodded eagerly. For the next 15 minutes, David explained everything he'd learned about puppy care. The girl's mother watched, amazed at his knowledge. And if you're ever worried, David finished, Dr. Charles and I are always here to help. Just like you helped us, the mother said to John. Actually, John smiled. David taught me as much about helping as I taught him. Later, as they cleaned up for the day, David found the photo album John kept in his office. The first page showed a much younger John with his mother and a cat, the one Dr. Miller had saved. That was my first patient, John said softly from behind him. Though I didn't know it then. Like Lucky was mine? Exactly like that. John sat beside him. Sometimes the animals we save end up saving us instead. Lucky's head popped up at the sound of his name. His tail thumped against the floor. Dr. Charles? David asked suddenly. Do you think Dr. Miller would be proud of how you're helping people like he helped you? John was quiet for a moment. I think he'd be prouder of you, David. You're learning faster than I did. Really? Really? John stood up. Now, ready for one last patient? Emergency call just came in. David straightened his white coat. What kind of emergency? Cat stuck in a fence. Needs gentle hands and a calm presence. Lucky can help, David said excitedly. He's great with scared cats now. Then what are we waiting for? John grabbed his bag. Let's go save another life. They drove through the darkening streets, Lucky between them in the truck. David watched the city lights blur past, remembering nights not so long ago when he'd felt just as trapped as the cat they were going to help. But that was then. Now he had purpose. Now he had hope. Now he had a chance to be the helper instead of the one needing help. And that, David realized, was the greatest healing of all. The autumn leaves swirled around David's feet as he walked to the clinic, exactly 1 year after finding Lucky in that dark alley. The morning air was crisp, carrying the same chill that had led him to discover a shivering puppy behind the trash cans. Lucky trotted beside him, no longer the scared, sick stray, but a healthy, confident dog. His red collar jingled with each step, tag catching the morning light. Big day, boy, David said, adjusting his white coat. It almost fit now he'd grown in the past year. The clinic's windows were dark when they arrived, but David had his own key now. He unlocked the door, flipped on the lights, and started the morning routine he'd perfected over countless Saturdays. Check the overnight patients first, he reminded himself, though he didn't need to. The routine was second nature now. 2 cats and a rabbit occupied the recovery kennels. David checked their charts, recorded their vital signs, and refreshed their water, Lucky following faithfully behind. Morning, Dr. David. He turned to find John watching from the doorway, smiling. Still too early to be called doctor, David laughed. Not according to the surprise we have planned. David tilted his head. Surprise? You'll see. John checked his watch. They should be here soon. As if on cue, the front door chimed. David heard familiar voices, his mom, Tommy and his mom, other clients they'd helped over the past year. David, John called. Can you come to the waiting room? The scene that greeted him made David stop short. The waiting room was decorated with balloons and a banner reading, Happy 1-year anniversary. Sarah stood at the center, holding a small wrapped package. What's all this? David asked, amazed. 1 year ago today, John began, a very special puppy found a very special boy. And together, they changed more lives than they knew. Tommy stepped forward. You showed me it was okay to ask for help. He held his healthy cat. Now my mom has a good job too. The little girl with Princess, the puppy waved. You taught me how to be a good dog owner. One by one, people shared their stories. How David's example had given them courage. How his kindness had shown them the way forward. And now, John said, we have something for you. Sarah handed David the package. His hand shook slightly as he unwrapped it. Inside was a new white coat. But this one was different. Above the pocket, embroidered in blue thread, were the words, David Williams, Junior Veterinarian. David's voice caught. Really? Really? John placed a hand on his shoulder. You've earned it. And there's more. He handed David an envelope. Inside was a savings bond and a letter. It's a scholarship fund, Sarah explained, wiping happy tears. Dr. Charles started it and all our clients contributed. For veterinary school. When you're ready. David stared at the letter, overwhelmed. Lucky pressed against his leg, offering silent support like always. That's not all, John continued. Remember how we talked about expanding the clinic? David nodded. The building next door had been empty for months. Well, we just bought it, and I'm going to need a full-time assistant manager to help run both buildings. John smiled at Sarah, someone who's proven herself excellent at organization and client care. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. Me? The night job was always temporary, John said gently. This is your real calling. Just like veterinary medicine is David's. Lucky barked, tail wagging as if he understood every word. There's one more thing, Tommy's mom said. She opened the clinic door. Outside, a line of people stretched down the block. Each one held a pet carrier or leash. Many were from their old neighborhood, people who couldn't normally afford vet care. What's going on? David asked. Free clinic day, John explained. Your idea, remember? When you said everyone deserves help with their pets? David remembered mentioning it months ago, dreaming out loud during a quiet afternoon. All these people, he whispered, all here because of the example you and Lucky set. John gestured to the crowd. Ready to help them? David straightened his new coat, feeling the weight of the title on his chest. Lucky sat perfectly at attention beside him. Ready? He said firmly. The day passed in a blur of wagging tails, purring cats, and grateful faces. David moved from patient to patient, using everything he'd learned over the past year. Just like you taught me, he told Lucky between exams the dog stayed close, greeting each new animal with gentle confidence. During a quiet moment, David found John in his office, looking at the old photo of himself with Dr. Miller. Thank you, David said softly. For everything, John smiled. Thank you for showing me that miracles still happen. That one act of kindness can change the world. Do you think? David hesitated. Do you think I could be like Dr. Miller someday? Helping people and animals together? David, John said gently, you already are. The day ended with tired feet, but full hearts. As David and Sarah walked home, Lucky prancing between them, the setting sun painted the street gold. Mom? David asked. Are you happy? Really happy? Sarah looked at her son, no longer the scared, hungry boy of a year ago, but a confident young healer with a bright future. More than I ever dreamed possible, she said. They passed the alley where it all began. Lucky paused, sniffing the air as if remembering. You know what Dr. Charles always says? David smiled. Sometimes the animals we save end up saving us instead. Lucky wagged his tail, looking up at them with knowing eyes. And in that moment, as the autumn wind scattered leaves around their feet, David understood something profound. Sometimes the smallest choices, like helping a scared puppy on a cold night, could grow into the biggest changes. Sometimes love, given freely without expectation, could heal more than just broken bones or sick bodies. Sometimes it could heal entire lives. He touched the embroidered words on his new coat, feeling the future unfold before him like a bright, endless road. And Lucky, the brave little puppy who had started it all, led the way home.